The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the modest railway station in Florissant, Colorado, and Katherine Oliver pressed herself against the far corner of her seat, her hands trembling as she clutched her worn carpet bag to her chest like a shield. Through the dusty window, she could see men moving about, their voices carrying on the crisp autumn air of 1882, and each sound made her flinch as though she had been struck. The journey from Philadelphia had taken nearly 2 weeks, and with every passing mile, the knot of fear in her stomach had tightened until she could barely breathe. Now, facing the prospect of meeting the man who had paid for her passage west, the man she had agreed to marry through letters exchanged over 6 months, Katherine wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The driver appeared at the door, his weathered face creasing into what might have been a smile. "Miss, we have arrived in Florissant. Your intended should be waiting inside the station." Katherine nodded but could not make herself move. The driver's expression softened with something that might have been pity, and he stepped back, giving her space. She forced herself to take a breath, then another, reminding herself that she had no choice. Returning to Philadelphia meant returning to her uncle's house, and that was not an option. That would never be an option again. She stood on legs that felt like water and made her way to the door. The driver offered his hand to help her down, and Katherine stared at it for a long moment before finally, quickly, touching it just long enough to steady herself as she descended. The moment her feet touched the ground, she released him and stepped back, her whole body rigid with tension. The station was a simple wooden structure, painted white but graying from the mountain sun and wind. Florissant sat in a valley surrounded by mountains, their peaks already dusted with early snow. The air was thin and cold, so different from the humid streets of Philadelphia. Katherine forced herself to walk toward the station door, each step requiring more courage than the last. Inside, the station was warm from a pot-bellied stove in the corner. A handful of people occupied the space, but Katherine's eyes immediately found the tall man standing near the window, hat in his hands, watching the door. He was lean and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a sun-weathered face that put him somewhere near 30. When his eyes met hers, they were a startling shade of blue-gray, and Katherine froze. He did not move toward her. Instead, he simply nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, and stayed where he was. "Miss Oliver," his voice was quiet, careful, and something in Katherine's chest loosened just slightly. "Yes," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am Matthew Reeves. I have been looking forward to meeting you." He shifted his weight, and Katherine noticed that he kept his distance, at least 10 feet between them. "I imagine you are tired from your journey. I have arranged a room for you at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. It is respectable, and Mrs. Henderson is a kind woman. I thought you might want to rest before we discuss anything further." Katherine stared at him, trying to reconcile this careful, patient man with the harsh voices and cruel hands she had learned to fear. "You do not wish to marry right away?" Matthew shook his head slowly. "Miss Oliver, I believe we should take some time to become acquainted. There is no rush. I want you to be comfortable here." He paused, and his expression grew even gentler. "Your letters suggested you had experienced some hardship. I want you to know that you are safe here. I will not pressure you in any way." Something hot and painful pressed against the back of Katherine's eyes. She had not expected kindness. She had expected demands, expectations, the weight of obligation that would crush her just as surely as her uncle's fists had. "I see. Would you like to see your room? Mrs. Henderson's boarding house is just down the street. I can carry your bag, or if you prefer, I can walk ahead and you can follow." The offer, given so simply, made Katherine's throat tight. "You can carry my bag, but please walk where I can see you." "Of course." Matthew stepped forward slowly, telegraphing his movements, and Katherine set her carpetbag down between them. He picked it up without coming close enough to touch her, then moved toward the door. The boarding house is 3 buildings down on the right. Mrs. Henderson is expecting you. They walked in silence through the small town. Florissant was even smaller than Katherine had imagined, with a single main street lined with wooden buildings. A general store, a saloon, a church with a white steeple, a blacksmith's forge sending sparks into the afternoon air. People nodded to Matthew as they passed, their curious eyes sliding to Katherine with poorly concealed interest. She kept her gaze down, focusing on the boardwalk beneath her feet. Mrs. Henderson proved to be a plump woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and warm brown eyes. She welcomed Katherine with genuine warmth, but seemed to sense her nervousness and did not try to embrace her. "Come in, dear. I have a lovely room ready for you. Matthew has paid for the first month, and there is no expectation beyond that. You are welcome here as long as you need." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand with a chipped porcelain basin, and a window that looked out over the mountains. Katherine stood in the doorway, unable to quite believe that this space was hers, with no strings attached. Matthew set her bag on the floor just inside the door. "I will leave you to rest. Mrs. Henderson serves dinner at 6 if you feel up to coming down, but she can bring a tray to your room if you prefer. Tomorrow, if you are willing, perhaps we could talk. There is a nice spot by the creek where it is peaceful and open. You would be able to see anyone approaching from a long way off." Katherine's hands were shaking again. "Why are you being so kind?" Matthew met her eyes steadily. "Because you deserve kindness, Miss Oliver. Whatever happened to you before, you deserve better." He nodded to Mrs. Henderson and then left, his footsteps quiet on the stairs. Katherine sank onto the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. That evening she did not go down for dinner. Mrs. Henderson brought a tray with chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread, along with hot tea. She set it on the small table by the window and patted Katherine's shoulder gently before leaving. Katherine ate slowly, tasting food properly for the first time in weeks, and watched the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The next morning, Katherine woke to find that Mrs. Henderson had left a basin of warm water outside her door, along with a clean towel. She washed her face and changed into her second dress, the better of her two, though both were worn and mended in places. When she came downstairs, Mrs. Henderson was in the kitchen, humming as she worked. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you." Katherine hesitated. "Mr. Reeves said he wanted to speak with me today. Matthew is a good man." Mrs. Henderson poured coffee into a sturdy mug and handed it to Katherine. "He has been alone since he came to Florissant 5 years ago. Works hard, keeps to himself mostly, but he is always fair and always kind. When he told me he was bringing a bride out from the East, I confess I was surprised. But after meeting you, I think perhaps I understand a little better." Katherine wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "What do you understand?" "That sometimes people find each other because they recognize something in one another, a shared hurt perhaps, or a shared hope." Mrs. Henderson smiled. "Give him a chance, dear. I think you will find he means what he says." Matthew arrived at 10 o'clock, knocking quietly on the front door. Katherine felt her heart hammering as she walked to meet him, but when she opened the door, he was standing several feet back, his hat in his hands again, his expression open and patient. "Good morning, Miss Oliver. Would you like to take that walk I mentioned? The weather is fine today." Katherine nodded and retrieved her shawl. They walked through town again, this time heading away from the main street toward a path that led through stands of aspen and pine. The leaves on the aspens were golden, shimmering in the morning breeze, and the sound of running water grew louder as they approached the creek. Matthew had been right. The spot he brought her to was open, with clear sightlines in all directions. A large, flat rock sat near the water's edge, and he gestured to it. "Would you like to sit?" Katherine sat on one end of the rock, and Matthew sat on the other, leaving a good 3 feet between them. For a long moment, they simply listened to the water. "I want to be honest with you," Matthew said finally. "I wrote those letters because I was lonely, and I hoped to find a wife. But after your last few letters, I began to suspect that you were coming here out of desperation rather than hope. I want you to know that I will not hold you to any promise made under duress." Catherine's throat tightened. "I have nowhere else to go." "Then you will stay here, and we will figure things out as we go. There is no requirement that we marry. If in time you decide you want that, then we will marry. If you decide you want something else, I will help you however I can." He picked up a small stone and turned it over in his fingers. "I know what it is like to be afraid, Miss Oliver. I know what it is like to have someone use their strength against you. I will never do that to you. You have my word." "How can I believe you?" The question came out more harshly than Katherine intended, but Matthew did not seem offended. "You cannot, not yet. But I hope that in time I can show you through my actions. For now, I only ask that you give me the chance to try." They sat by the creek for nearly an hour, not talking much, just existing in the same space. Katherine found that the silence was not uncomfortable. Matthew did not press her with questions or try to fill every moment with words. When they finally walked back to town, Katherine felt the knot in her stomach had loosened just a little more. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Matthew would visit every few days, always at a predictable time, always careful to maintain distance. Sometimes they would walk by the creek. Sometimes they would sit on the porch of the boarding house while Mrs. Henderson worked in her garden. Matthew told her about his ranch, which was a small operation about 3 miles outside of town. He ran cattle and horses, and he worked the land mostly alone, with occasional help from a neighboring rancher during busy seasons. "Why did you come to Colorado?" Katherine asked one afternoon as they sat on the porch, watching the town go about its business. "I was running from something too," Matthew admitted. "Not quite the same as you, I think, but running nonetheless. My father was a hard man, and I learned early that the only way to survive was to make myself useful and stay out of his way. When he died, I realized I did not want to live in that house anymore, surrounded by those memories. So I sold everything and came west." "Do you have other family?" "A sister. She married and moved to California. We exchange letters a few times a year." He glanced at her. "What about you? Do you have anyone who will worry about you?" Katherine shook her head. "My parents died when I was 14, yellow fever. I went to live with my uncle, my father's brother. He was not a kind man." She stopped, her hands clenching in her lap. "When I turned 21 this past spring, I received a small inheritance from my mother's family. It was not much, but it was enough to pay for passage west. I saw your advertisement in the newspaper, and I thought perhaps it was a way out. I am sorry for what you endured." Matthew's voice was quiet but steady. "You did not deserve that." The words, simple as they were, pierced something deep in Katherine's chest. She had spent 6 years believing that somehow she had brought her uncle's anger upon herself. That if she had been quieter, more obedient, less visible, perhaps he would not have hurt her. Hearing Matthew say otherwise with such certainty made her realize how hungry she had been for someone to see the truth. "Thank you," she whispered. As October turned to November, the weather grew colder. Snow fell more frequently, dusting the mountains and occasionally the town itself. Matthew began bringing Katherine small gifts, always careful to present them in a way that did not feel obligatory or demanding. A pair of warm gloves, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, a jar of honey from a neighbor's hives. Each gift came with a quiet explanation and no expectation of thanks, though Katherine always gave it anyway. She began to look forward to his visits. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long was still there, but it no longer overwhelmed everything else. She found herself curious about Matthew's life, his ranch, the work he did. She asked him questions, and he answered them thoughtfully, never condescending or impatient. One day in late November, as they walked along the creek, Katherine stopped suddenly. "Can I see your ranch?" Matthew turned, surprise clear on his face. "Are you certain?" "I think so. I want to understand your life better." She met his eyes, something she found herself able to do more often now, "and I want to see if I can imagine myself as part of it." The ride out to the ranch was Katherine's first time on a horse since she was a child. Matthew had borrowed a gentle mare from the livery and helped Katherine into the saddle, his touch brief and impersonal, his instructions clear and patient. The ranch sat in a small valley, sheltered by a ridge of pines. The house was modest, a single story with a wide porch and a stone chimney. The barn and corrals were well maintained, and a handful of cattle grazed in the near pasture. Matthew helped her down and led her toward the house. "It is not much, but it is sturdy and warm. I built most of it myself." Inside, the house was simple but comfortable. A large main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. Two smaller rooms branched off, one that served as Matthew's bedroom and another that he used for storage. Everything was neat and orderly, the mark of a man who lived alone and kept his space with care. "If you did decide to stay, I would add another room," Matthew said, watching her take it all in. "I want you to have your own space, your own privacy. There would be no expectation for us to share a bed until you wanted that, if you ever did." Katherine walked to the window and looked out at the mountains. "You have thought about this a great deal." "I have. I want you to feel safe, Katherine. That is the most important thing to me." The use of her first name, which he had asked permission to use the week before, still sent a small thrill through her. "I think I could be happy here," she said slowly. "I think I could learn to call this place home." Matthew's smile was bright and genuine. "That is all I could hope for." They spent the afternoon at the ranch, and Matthew showed her around. He introduced her to his horses, 3 sturdy animals he had trained himself. He showed her the garden plot where he grew vegetables in the summer, now covered with mulch for the winter. He pointed out where he planned to expand the barn and possibly add a chicken coop. With every detail he shared, Katherine could see the life he was building, the future he envisioned, and slowly, she began to see herself as part of that vision. As the sun began to set, Matthew prepared to take her back to town. "Thank you for coming today. It means a great deal to me." "Thank you for showing me." Katherine hesitated, then made herself say the words that had been building in her chest all afternoon. "I would like to come back." "Soon, if that is acceptable." "Anytime you want. You are always welcome here, Katherine." The ride back to Florissant was quiet, but it was the comfortable silence Katherine had grown to appreciate. When they reached the boarding house, Matthew helped her down, and this time Katherine did not flinch at his touch. December brought heavy snows, and travel became more difficult. Matthew's visits became less frequent, though he sent notes with the mail rider, checking on Katherine and letting her know he was thinking of her. Mrs. Henderson proved to be excellent company, and Katherine found herself helping around the boarding house, cooking and cleaning alongside the older woman. It felt good to be useful, to contribute rather than simply existing in a space. On Christmas Eve, Matthew arrived at the boarding house with a small pine tree. "I thought we could decorate it," he said, his cheeks red from the cold. "If you would like to, that is." Mrs. Henderson clapped her hands together with delight, and the three of them spent the evening stringing popcorn and cutting paper snowflakes. Matthew had brought ribbons and a few small candles, and by the time they finished, the tree looked cheerful and bright in the corner of Mrs. Henderson's parlor. "This is the nicest Christmas I have had in years," Katherine said as they stood back to admire their work. "Mine as well," Matthew agreed. Mrs. Henderson served hot cider and gingerbread, and they sat by the fire, talking and laughing. It was the first time Katherine could remember feeling genuinely happy in longer than she could recall. When Matthew finally rose to leave, Katherine walked him to the door. "Thank you for tonight," she said. "It was lovely. I am glad." Matthew pulled on his gloves, then hesitated. "Katherine, I know I have said I will not pressure you, and I mean that. But I want you to know that my feelings for you have grown beyond simple companionship. I care about you deeply. Whenever you are ready, if you are ever ready, I would be honored to marry you. But there is no rush. We have all the time in the world." Katherine felt her heart swell in her chest. "I care about you too, Matthew, more than I thought possible. I am not ready yet, but I think I am getting there." "That is all I need to hear." He smiled at her, and Katherine found herself smiling back. The new year of 1883 arrived with more snow and bitterly cold winds. Katherine spent much of January indoors, reading and sewing and helping Mrs. Henderson. But as February came and the days began to slowly lengthen, Katherine found herself restless. She missed Matthew with an intensity that surprised her. She missed their walks, their conversations, the quiet comfort of his presence. When the weather finally cleared enough for travel, Matthew arrived at the boarding house with a proposition. "I have been thinking," he said as they sat in Mrs. Henderson's parlor. "I would like to teach you to ride properly. The mare I borrowed for you before is gentle and patient, and I think you would enjoy having that freedom. What do you think?" Katherine considered it. The idea of being on horseback, of having that kind of mobility and independence, appealed to her greatly. "I would like that." Over the next several weeks, Matthew gave her riding lessons. He was a patient teacher, never frustrated when she made mistakes, always encouraging when she succeeded. Katherine found that she loved being on horseback, loved the feeling of movement and power beneath her. More than that, she loved the time spent with Matthew, the easy camaraderie that had developed between them. One afternoon in early March, as they rode along a trail that wound through the pine forest, Katherine found herself laughing at something Matthew had said. The sound startled her. She could not remember the last time she had laughed so freely. Matthew glanced over at her, his expression warm. "You have a beautiful laugh." Katherine felt her cheeks heat. "I have not had much reason to laugh in recent years." "Then I will have to make it my mission to give you reasons." He grinned at her, and Katherine felt something flutter in her chest. They dismounted near a clearing where early wildflowers were just beginning to push through the melting snow. Matthew spread out a blanket he had brought and unpacked a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and apples. They ate in comfortable silence, watching a hawk circle overhead. "I have been thinking about your offer," Katherine said suddenly. The words came out in a rush, and she had to force herself to continue. "About marriage, I think I would like that. I think I am ready." Matthew set down the apple he had been eating and turned to face her fully. "Are you certain?" "I do not want you to feel rushed." "I am certain." Katherine took a deep breath. "You have been patient and kind and gentle with me. You have shown me that not all men are like my uncle. You have given me space to heal, and because of that, I think I have healed enough to move forward. I want to build a life with you, Matthew. I want to be your wife." Matthew reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and took her hand. His fingers were warm and calloused from work, and his touch was gentle. "Then I will be the happiest man in Colorado. We can be married as soon as you wish." "Soon," Katherine said, squeezing his hand. "I want it to be soon." They were married 2 weeks later in the small white church in Florissant. Mrs. Henderson served as witness, along with the neighboring rancher and his wife, who had become friends with Matthew over the years. Katherine wore a simple dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her make, pale blue with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Matthew wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes shining as Katherine walked down the aisle toward him. The ceremony was short and simple. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Matthew leaned in slowly, giving Katherine time to pull away if she wanted. She did not. His kiss was gentle and brief, and when he pulled back, his smile was radiant. "Hello, wife," he said softly. "Hello, husband," Katherine replied, and felt joy bloom in her chest. They held a small reception at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, with cake and coffee and well wishes from the handful of townspeople who had become Katherine's friends over the past months. As the afternoon faded into evening, Matthew helped Katherine into the wagon for the ride out to the ranch. "Are you nervous?" he asked as they drove through the gathering dusk. "A little," Katherine admitted, "but not in the way I once was. I trust you, Matthew." "I will do everything I can to be worthy of that trust." The house was warm when they arrived, a fire already laid in the fireplace. Matthew had added the additional room he had promised, a space that was clearly meant to be Katherine's own. It had a bed, a dresser, a small desk by the window, and a door that locked from the inside. "This is yours," Matthew said, showing her the room, "for as long as you want it. There is no expectation that you will share my bed tonight or any night until you are ready. I mean that, Katherine. We are married, yes, but that does not change the promises I made to you." Katherine looked around the room, then back at Matthew. "I know, and I am grateful for it, but I think I would like to try. Not everything, not tonight, but I would like to sleep beside you. I would like to learn to be close to you without fear." Matthew's expression was tender. "Then that is what we will do." That night, they lay together in Matthew's bed, both fully clothed with space between them. Matthew held her hand in the darkness, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. Katherine felt her heart racing, but it was not entirely from fear. There was something else there too, something warm and hopeful. "Thank you for waiting for me," she whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for trusting me," Matthew replied. They fell asleep like that, hands linked, and Katherine did not have nightmares for the first time in years. The months that followed were a time of adjustment and discovery. Katherine learned the rhythms of ranch life, the daily chores and seasonal work. She proved to be a quick learner and a hard worker, and Matthew never failed to tell her how much he appreciated her help. They worked side by side, building a partnership that extended beyond their marriage vows. Slowly, carefully, they learned each other in more intimate ways. Matthew never pushed, never demanded, always letting Katherine set the pace. There were moments when fear would rise up in her, sudden and sharp, and Matthew would immediately pull back, giving her space and reassurance. But those moments grew less frequent as trust deepened. One night in June, as they lay together in the darkness, Katherine turned to Matthew and said, "I want all of you. I want to be fully your wife." Matthew cupped her face gently. "Are you certain?" "I am certain." What followed was tender and slow, filled with whispered reassurances and gentle touches. Matthew was patient and careful, and when Katherine cried, he held her and whispered that she was safe, that she was loved, that she was beautiful. Afterwards, Katherine lay in his arms and felt whole in a way she had never experienced before. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Matthew replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "More than I can say." The summer passed in a blur of work and laughter and growing love. Catherine's garden flourished, providing vegetables that she preserved for the winter. Matthew's cattle brought a good price at market, and they began to talk about the future, about expanding the ranch, about the family they might one day have. In September, Catherine realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week to be sure, then told Matthew over breakfast one morning, "I think I might be with child." Matthew's fork clattered to his plate and his eyes went wide. "Truly, I think so. It is still early, but the signs are there." Matthew came around the table and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Are you happy about this?" Catherine thought about the question seriously. A year ago, the idea of having a child would have terrified her. But now, with Matthew beside her in this home they had built together, she found that she was not afraid. "Yes," she said, "I am happy." Matthew pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "Then I am happy too." The pregnancy was not easy. Catherine suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and the doctor in Florissant recommended as much rest as possible. Matthew took over most of the household chores without complaint, bringing her tea and toast in bed, reading to her in the evenings when she was too tired to do anything else. As winter set in again and Catherine's belly swelled, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Matthew built a cradle from pine wood, carefully sanding and finishing it until it was smooth as silk. Catherine sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of anticipation. In February of 1884, on a snowy afternoon, Catherine's labor began. Mrs. Henderson came to help along with the doctor, and Matthew paced the main room, listening to Catherine's cries with growing anxiety. Mrs. Henderson kept reassuring him that all was normal, that Catherine was strong, that the baby would be fine. After 8 hours of labor, as the sun was setting, a baby's cry filled the house. Matthew rushed into the bedroom to find Catherine exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. "It is a boy," the doctor announced, "healthy and strong." Matthew approached slowly, his eyes wide with wonder. Catherine held out the baby, and he took his son carefully, cradling him as though he were made of glass. The baby had a cap of dark hair and eyes that would likely be blue like his father's. "Hello, little one," Matthew whispered. "I am your father, and I promise I will never hurt you. I promise I will love you and protect you and teach you to be kind. I promise." Catherine watched through tears as Matthew held their son, and she knew with absolute certainty that this child would grow up knowing only love and safety. The cycle of violence that had marked her own childhood was broken. They had created something new, something better. They named him James, after Catherine's father, and he proved to be a happy, healthy baby. Matthew was a devoted father, changing diapers and walking the floor with James when he cried at night, never complaining about lost sleep or extra work. Catherine watched her husband with their son and fell even more deeply in love with him. The years that followed were filled with joy and hard work. The ranch prospered, and they were able to buy more land and increase their herd. James grew into a bright, curious toddler with his father's smile and his mother's determination. When he was 2, Catherine became pregnant again, and in the spring of 1886 they welcomed a daughter they named Rose. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. The children grew, healthy and happy. Matthew expanded the house, adding more rooms as their family grew. Catherine became active in the church and the small community, her confidence and strength growing with each passing year. The frightened woman who had arrived in Florissant was gone, replaced by someone strong and capable and loved. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while the children played in the yard, Katherine took Matthew's hand. "You remember when I first arrived?" she asked. "How terrified I was." "I do. You could barely look at me. I never imagined I could feel the way I do now, safe and loved and happy." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for waiting until I was ready." Matthew kissed the top of her head. "I would have waited forever if necessary." "You were worth the wait." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as James chased Rose around the yard, both children giggling. The mountains rose behind them, solid and eternal, and the sky painted itself in shades of gold and rose. Katherine thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain and fear that had driven her west, and the love that had healed her. She had come to Colorado running from one life, and had found another waiting for her. A better life, filled with a love she had never dared to imagine. And as she sat there with Matthew's arm around her shoulders and her children's laughter ringing in the evening air, Katherine knew that she had finally found her home. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing of seasons and the growth of their children. James proved to be a natural with horses, much like his father, and by the time he was 6, he was helping Matthew with the ranch work in small ways. Rose was more interested in the garden and the kitchen, following her mother around and asking endless questions about everything she did. In 1888, Katherine gave birth to another son, whom they named Thomas. He was a quiet baby, content to watch the world with wide, thoughtful eyes. Matthew joked that Thomas would grow up to be a scholar, while James would be a rancher and Rose would likely run them all. The ranch continued to prosper. Matthew's reputation for raising quality horses spread, and buyers came from as far as Denver to purchase his stock. Katherine kept meticulous records of their finances and proved to have a head for business that complemented Matthew's skills with the animals. Together, they built something substantial and lasting, but life was not without its challenges. In the winter of 1889, a harsh blizzard struck the region. They lost several head of cattle, and one of the barns partially collapsed under the weight of snow. Matthew worked himself to exhaustion digging out, repairing damage, and caring for the surviving animals. Katherine worried about him, but she also marveled at his determination and resilience. When spring finally came and the snow melted, they surveyed the damage and made plans to rebuild. "We will come back from this," Matthew said, his arm around Katherine's waist. "We always do." And they did. By summer, the barn was repaired and even improved with better support beams and a larger loft for hay storage. They purchased new cattle to replace those lost, and the herd rebuilt itself through natural breeding. It was a lesson in perseverance that Katherine made sure to share with their children. James, at 7 years old, was old enough to understand that sometimes life was hard, but that did not mean they gave up. Rose, at 5, simply accepted that her father could fix anything and her mother could solve any problem. Thomas, still a toddler, was mostly interested in the barn cats and whether he could convince them to let him pet them. As the children grew, Katherine found herself thinking often about how different their childhood was from her own. They knew nothing of fear or violence. They knew only love and security, firm boundaries paired with gentle guidance. Matthew never raised his hand to them, never his voice beyond what was necessary to be heard across a distance. When discipline was needed, it came in the form of calm conversations and logical consequences, never cruelty or intimidation. One evening, after the children were in bed, Matthew found Katherine standing by the window, looking out at the stars. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I am thinking about how lucky our children are, how lucky I am." She leaned back against him. "Sometimes I still cannot quite believe this is my life. I know what you mean. Sometimes I wake up and have to remind myself that you are real, that this family is real. It seems too good to be true. But it is true. We built this together, Matthew. We did." He pressed a kiss to her temple, "and I am grateful for it every single day." In 1891, Katherine became pregnant again, and in early 1892 they welcomed twin girls into the world. The birth was difficult, and for a few frightening hours, the doctor was not certain Katherine would survive. But she was strong, and she fought her way through, emerging exhausted but alive with two tiny daughters, whom they named Anna and Emma. The twins brought chaos and joy in equal measure. They were identical, with their mother's light brown hair and their father's blue-gray eyes, and from the very beginning, they were inseparable. Matthew built a larger cradle to accommodate both of them, and Katherine learned to nurse them simultaneously, a skill that took practice and patience. James, now 9, appointed himself their protector. Rose, at 7, wanted to help with everything, from changing diapers to singing lullabies. Thomas, at 4, was simply fascinated by the fact that there were two babies instead of one, and spent a great deal of time staring at them, trying to figure out if they were exactly the same. The house felt full and alive, and Katherine thrived in the midst of it all. She had gone from a woman who could barely stand to be touched to a mother of 5 who spent her days surrounded by small hands reaching for her, little voices calling for her attention. It was overwhelming sometimes, but it was also healing in ways she was still discovering. As the 1890s progressed, Florissant grew as well. The railroad came through, bringing more people and more commerce. New businesses opened, including a proper school that the children could attend. Katherine was grateful for the educational opportunities, though she and Matthew also made sure to teach the children at home about practical skills, about ranching and gardening, and the value of hard work. Matthew's relationship with his sister in California deepened through letters, and in the summer of 1895, she came to visit with her own family. Katherine was nervous about meeting Matthew's only living relative, but those fears proved unfounded. Rebecca was warm and kind, and her husband and 3 children fit seamlessly into the chaos of the Reeves household. The two families spent a wonderful month together, and Katherine and Rebecca became fast friends. When it came time for Rebecca to return to California, they promised to visit each other more often, and they kept that promise. Every few years, one family would travel to visit the other, and the cousins grew up knowing and loving each other. In 1898, as the century drew toward its close, Matthew and Katherine celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. Their children ranged from James, now 16 and nearly a man, to the twins, who were 6 and as wild as the mountain winds. They held a party at the ranch, inviting friends from town and neighboring ranches, and the celebration lasted well into the night. As Katherine stood on the porch watching their guests dance and laugh, Matthew came up beside her. "Tired?" he asked, a little but happy. She smiled up at him. "It has been quite a life we have built, has it not?" "It has, and I would not change a single moment of it. Not even the hard parts, not even those. The hard parts made us who we are. They taught us what we are capable of." He took her hand and raised it to his lips. "You are the strongest person I know, Katherine. You survived things that would have broken most people, and you not only survived, you thrived. You built a beautiful family and a beautiful life. I am in awe of you." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. Even after all these years, Matthew's words still had the power to move her deeply. "I could not have done any of it without you. You gave me the space and time to heal. You showed me what love was supposed to look like. You saved me, Matthew. We saved each other, he corrected gently. You taught me how to be patient, how to be gentle, how to love someone with my whole heart. You made me a better man. They stood together on the porch, hands linked, watching their family and friends celebrate. Katherine thought about the frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 16 years ago, and she hardly recognized her. That woman had been a ghost, barely alive, just surviving. The woman she was now was fully alive, deeply loved, and surrounded by a life she had helped create. As the new century dawned in 1900, the Reeves family found themselves looking toward the future with hope and excitement. James was talking about starting his own ranch someday, possibly partnering with his father to expand their operations. Rose had discovered a love of teaching and was helping the younger children in the Florissant school with their lessons. Thomas was showing an interest in the mechanical side of ranching, always tinkering with equipment and figuring out how things worked. The twins, now 8, were still inseparable and still causing double the mischief wherever they went. Katherine, now in her early 40s, found herself entering a new phase of life. Her children needed her in different ways now, less physically demanding but perhaps more emotionally complex. She was there to listen to James's dreams for the future, to encourage Rose's passion for teaching, to help Thomas understand the world, to guide the twins through their wild energy. And through it all, Matthew remained her constant. They had grown together over the years, their love deepening and maturing. They still made time for each other, stealing moments alone when they could, taking walks by the creek that had witnessed the beginning of their relationship, lying together at night and talking about everything and nothing. In the spring of 1902, James married a young woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch. The wedding was a joyous celebration, and Katherine cried as she watched her firstborn pledge his life to another. Matthew stood beside her, his hand warm in hers, and when she looked up at him, she saw tears in his eyes too. "When did he get so grown up?" Matthew whispered. "I am not sure," Katherine replied. "It happened when we were not looking." A year later, James and Sarah welcomed their first child, a daughter, making Katherine and Matthew grandparents for the first time. Holding her granddaughter in her arms, Katherine felt the circle of life complete itself in a beautiful way. She had come from pain and fear, and she had created love and safety, and now that love was extending into another generation. As the years continued, each of the Reeves children found their own paths. Rose did indeed become a teacher, opening a small school in Florissant and marrying a kind man who worked at the general store. Thomas moved to Denver to study engineering, something that would have been impossible without the railroad that now connected Florissant to the wider world. The twins, true to form, did everything together, including marrying 2 brothers in a double wedding that was the talk of the town for months. Through all of it, Matthew and Katherine remained at the heart of their family, the steady center around which everything else revolved. The ranch continued to operate, though Matthew took on more help as he aged, allowing him to slow down a bit and enjoy life more. They added rocking chairs to the porch, and on summer evenings they would sit together, watching the sunset and talking about their grandchildren, about the changes coming to the West, about the memories they had built together. "You ever regret it?" Katherine asked one evening in 1910. They were both in their 50s now, their hair graying, their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. "Answering my letter all those years ago, taking a chance on someone as broken as I was." Matthew reached over and took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. "Not for a single second. You were never broken, Katherine. You were wounded, yes, but not broken. And watching you heal, watching you bloom into the woman you were always meant to be, has been the greatest privilege of my life." "I love you," Katherine said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. "I love you too. Always have, always will." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. Katherine thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, about the fear and pain that had driven her west, about the patience and love that had healed her. She had come to Colorado in 1882 as a terrified woman running from a nightmare, and she had found a man who was willing to wait, to be patient, to love her without demands or expectations. Together, they had built a life that neither of them could have imagined in those early days. They had raised 5 children who knew only love and security. They had built a successful ranch that provided for their family and employed others from the community. They had become pillars of Florissant, respected and loved by their neighbors. They had weathered storms and hardships, celebrated victories and joys, and through it all, they had remained true to each other and to the promises they had made. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Katherine leaned her head against Matthew's shoulder and felt, perhaps for the 1,000th time, the simple truth of her life. She was safe, she was loved, and she was home. The years that followed were gentle ones. Matthew and Katherine watched their grandchildren grow, delighted in the arrivals of great-grandchildren, and enjoyed the slower pace that came with age. The ranch passed primarily into James's capable hands, though Matthew still went out most days to check on things and offer advice when asked. Katherine maintained her garden, smaller now but still productive, and spent time reading and writing letters to their far-flung family members. She occasionally helped Rose at the school, telling stories to the younger children about the early days of Florissant and the West. In the summer of 1920, Matthew and Katherine celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary. Their family gathered at the ranch for a huge celebration, with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filling every corner of the house and spilling out into the yard. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. As the celebration wound down and the younger children were being put to bed, Katherine and Matthew slipped away to their favorite spot by the creek. It had been years since they had walked this far, but they moved slowly, holding hands, taking their time. The creek burbled along as it always had, eternal and unchanging. They sat on the flat rock where Matthew had first promised Katherine that he would wait for her, that he would never hurt her, that she could take all the time she needed. "You remember the first time we sat here?" Matthew asked. "Of course I do. I was so frightened and you were so patient." Katherine squeezed his hand. "I did not believe you when you said you would wait. I did not believe anyone could be that kind. And now I know that you meant every word. You kept every promise you ever made to me, Matthew Reeves, every single one." They sat together as the sun set, just as they had hundreds of times before, and Katherine felt a deep, abiding peace. Her life had not been easy, and there were scars that would never fully fade, but she had been given something precious: time to heal, space to grow, and love without conditions. She had been terrified of men when she arrived in Florissant all those years ago. A young woman of 21 with nothing but a small inheritance and a desperate hope for something better. And Matthew had waited patiently until she was ready to trust, never pushing, never demanding, always present and always kind. That patience had saved her life. That love had healed her soul. And together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. As the stars came out and the mountains stood silent and strong around them, Katherine knew that her story, which had begun with such fear and pain, had become something remarkable, a testament to the healing power of patient love, to the strength found in gentleness, to the way broken things can become whole again when given time and care. She had come west running from darkness and had found light. She had arrived broken and had become whole. She had been terrified and she had learned to trust. And all of it, every moment of healing and growth and joy, had been possible because a cowboy named Matthew Reeves had been willing to wait. They sat by the creek until the moon rose, silver and full, and then they walked home together, hand in hand, just as they had for nearly 40 years. And Katherine knew, with the certainty that comes from a lifetime of love, that she was exactly where she was meant to be.